welcome to Pale Reflections, a proud member of the Duff Network where we reflect on Wildbow's most triumvirate work as it releases. I'm Ruben Morehouse.
And I'm Elliot Diebold.
And we are here to talk about Pale. Ooh, spooky. Speaking of spooky things, you know what else is spooky, Elliot?
A
Scary
fan art
monsters.
contest.
Yeah. Oh, good fan art. It's shocking to me and scary how bad I am in comparison. So yeah, we're in case you couldn't tell, that was us segueing into the discussion about the fact that we're running a fan art contest at the moment. Details are in the description down below, but draw some monsters and you might win a prize.
Yes, please send those in. I've forgotten exactly when entries close, but I don't think it's within the next week. So, you find
We've
just
got at least until our next episode, maybe even longer.
and next episode will come prepared with the ability to tell you when the entries close. I promise.
I make no such guarantees, but Elliot does, so that's good. All right, so today we're talking about Analim 3.6, Analim 3.7, confiscated items, and of course the usual discussion of predictions and a little bit of a bonus bit talking about technomancy as well. But before we get to all that, let's begin. You know, we did a fan art contest on monsters, so of course, let's begin with the biggest monster, Verona's dad. Analim 3.6 starts with a Verona kind of listlessly, not really sure what to do. So with no other options, she heads home and has a bit of a hangout with her dad.
Yeah. I think the beginning of this chapter is quite interesting in that Verona's thoughts on what she can do once Lucy and Avery are out of the picture almost serves as this kind of recap on where all the characters we know in the story are. Like Verona sort of goes through a list of why she can't hang out with anyone, who she might want as a familiar, like how she can't wait to go and hang out with Alexander at his school because that's a good idea apparently. It's like I think both chapters last week did a lot of like tinfoiling and moving stuff around in our heads, like trying to connect dots and stuff. And this one, the starter here, just kind of took this little step back and was like, okay, so just in case anyone's confused, here's where everything kind of sits, or how Verona feels everything sits. There, and to me, that feels like something you start to do as you begin the next massive shift in the status quo, which I suppose we'll get to in the next two chapters.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely feels like, I mean, I don't know. It feels like since Miss left, things haven't gotten to the next stage of the story yet. We're going to settle into things getting more and more hectic as we go, I suppose.
Yeah, but like I think the way we sort of just redraw all those lines for ourselves in this bit with Verona is just kind of like getting you ready to move on, because like, okay, now that you remember where everything is, let's start fucking with it.
Yeah, let's mess it all up again. So there's this interesting part here where Verona is reflecting on Lucy and the fact that Lucy's been going to so much therapy. And she reflects on how Lucy thinks it's just Jasmine kind of taking precautionary measures in case Paul presses charges. But it's interesting. It kind of gives the vibe that Lucy is like writing off how worried her mom is about her. Like there isn't anything to be worried about, and Lucy is kind of denying that. But Verona kind of sees through it a bit, seeing that Jasmine is really scared for Lucy. And I just think this was a nice little beat, because I'm definitely on Team Jasmine here, where there's a lot to be worried about with these three.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly, all three of them.
Yeah.
I completely agree. Like, I think I think Lucy's maybe underestimating how much help she's in need of and how much Jasmine is trying to give it to her.
Yeah. There's this other nice little bit where Verona just, when she's thinking about things like Gabe, she mentions to herself, it was easier to think of it as a puzzle. And I'm just like, yeah, Verona, that's a perfect distillation of your problem, is you think of these things in abstract terms that makes them easier to reconcile, which is a problem because you should be constantly having to reconcile how dangerous the situation you're in is.
Yeah, and I think we'll get into this a lot more as we get into Verona and her dad's hangout session in a minute. But
Yeah.
like you're right, this is sort of how Verona is trying to frame things. She wants to take the emotion out of it.
Yes.
Like it's easier to take a step back and just treat it as a puzzle.
Yeah. Easier, yes. That doesn't mean that
Better.
you exactly, right. You're not making any like emotional progress, you know?
Yeah.
Anyway, let's talk about the scene with her dad where Wabo is cruel, very cruel, and almost lets you think for a moment that there's a way that things are going to get better in this relationship before brutally snatching that away.
Uh, yeah. I mean, I felt like an idiot because I fell for it. I had a moment where I was like, "Has he changed?" And then, like, of course he hadn't. I don't
No,
know
he
what I was
hasn't
thinking.
changed, of course.
um, but like, I think part of the reason I got lured into this is as Verona gets home, all of her thoughts are like, "Oh, this is so awful. I hate everything about this. I hate that I hate
Yeah,
it because like." Her dad has instilled this lesson in her that like caring is a kind of weakness. Um,
yeah.
or at least that's sort of what she's taken out of his behavior to some
Well, yeah,
extent.
she has this moment where she thinks, I can't hang out with I keep wanting to say Verona, with Avery or Lucy. Like, what should I do? And one of the things that comes up is Jeremy, right?
Yeah.
The boy that she's been kind of casually flirting with. And she has the thought to herself of, no, that's a relationship. And as I know from my dad, relationships are the worst, is
Mm.
more or less what she thinks.
Well, I think there's like even more than that because like there's the bit later where she's sort of talking to Avery and she's so uncomfortable with
Mm,
sharing her emotions, and it's because
yes.
she kind of views that it's like this weird toxic masculinity almost. Although obviously,
Mm,
like she's not masculine, but it's like she associates like sharing your feelings with weakness essentially.
yes.
Um, Although like, not completely. Like I think if someone like Lucy or Avery opens up to her, she sees it as a good thing. But she has this double standard where when she does it's because she's weak or whatever.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it says, but like so when she's coming into the house, she's just lamenting how much she hates this place because she hates the fact that she hates it. And there's all this stuff about like her trying to remember when this wasn't the case, and there's basically all this stuff setting it up like reminding us how long this has been a problem.
Mm.
So it's kind of like, hey, remember how terrible this has been? And so then when you sort of see the light, I, much like Verona, just went grasping for it. I was like, yes, please, please, he's better now. It's fine.
But of course it's not. He's not. I in my notes I mentioned that Walbo teased us with it, but the word tease is too playful and joyous because it's not this fun thing. It just is pain.
Yeah, because you can see it starting to happen. Like I think
Yeah.
it was by the time she does the laundry, and then he comes up and he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm just gonna watch like 5 minutes of the weather," and I was like, "No, that's too
Yep.
many. One more things. I don't know. Don't do this to me."
Yeah. That's terrible. There's this other bit that I thought was funny. I mean, you got to find the fun where you can, I guess. Where her dad, she smiles. She genuinely has like a smile from an interaction with her dad, and of course he ruins it by saying, "Oh, there we go, a smile." In that very much the same way that we saw with Lucy a few chapters ago, where it was, why don't you smile more? And this is the second beat of somebody like drawing attention to the Kenneters smiling, and it immediately souring the moment.
I think this
So
is
obviously we're going to get a third one with Avery, so that'll be fun.
Yeah, yeah. I'm trying to think who the worst person would be to draw that out of
Mm.
Avery. Maybe
I was
Pam.
I was thinking there's probably somewhere to tie the Hungry Choir's mouth imagery into it, but I couldn't think of the compelling way to make it
Hungry
happen.
Quiet telling you to smile more. No, I think of this as a bit different. Like the sort of dad trying to cheer their kid up with like, oh, there's a smile. Like
Yeah.
it's different energy, but I agree. Like the fact that she just immediately makes her face neutral again afterwards, kind of shows
Yes.
how off the point it was. But like, yeah, I mean, it kind of sucks because as soon as it started to fall apart, like I was kicking myself. It was like because of course he wasn't just going to have like flipped a switch and changed. Like that's not how depression works. You don't just like have an extra bad day and you think, no, that's it. I'm done with depression. I'm going to like beat it and
Yeah.
if I just try harder I won't be depressed anymore. Like that's
Yeah. Just
like
snap out of it.
yeah, exactly. Like I was like of course, like what was I thinking? um and yeah, like he it's sort of like I mean I like I've sort of been through this where it's like he's depressed and then something like this it gets him to get his head above water for a second, but like unless you make drastic changes, like the pattern's too established, his head's gonna go back under, and that's what we see in real time here.
It's immediate. There's no. It's like there's no. It's he immediately regresses. It's like 5 minutes that he's even a hint of positive, and then it's immediately gone. It's
Yeah,
not
and
even 5 minutes. It's like 5 fucking seconds.
to be like fair, like because he was so far under, and it's like what it took is
Yeah.
Verona spitting in his face and a half day at work to get him to surface for 5 seconds, and then like the tide just pulls him straight back. So
Yeah.
yeah, like it was just what hurt about this is that I fell for it, and then in retrospect, it was inevitable, and I don't know what I was thinking.
Yeah. Like
And
obviously it wasn't just going to be fine from now on.
yeah, but like I think that's great because that's kind of the journey Verona goes through. Like Verona gets her hopes up as well, and she's like, okay, I'm gonna give him this chance. This seems genuine. Then he falls apart, and
Yeah.
she's just like, what was I thinking? And as a reader, I was right beside her. I was like, what was I thinking? I fell
Yeah.
for it as
Why would
well.
you?
Yeah,
She has this. It's this really sad moment where, as she's leaving the scene, she thinks to herself, like, "This is my own fault. I gave him a nugget of emotional,
yeah,
belief, and off. It's gone. It's done."
yeah. Like I'm so morbidly fascinated to see where the relationship between these two goes by
Mm,
the end of the story, just because I mean I don't know where you go from here that isn't just cutting contact or at least severely minimizing it. um
mm.
but also he needs help. Yeah, I don't know. I'm also like my theory at this point is we're going to meet Verona's mum as the summer comes up, and there'll probably be this moment where like, oh, her dad's not so bad.
That's daunting. How terrible does the mother have to be for VD to be normalized?
I mean,
Like,
yeah, well, Verona has decided not to live with her mum, and like her hometown and Lucy and stuff are presumably factors in that. But like
yeah,
the situation with her dad is so bad, you have to think if her mum was at all not a piece of shit,
anything. Yeah,
it'd be more of a consideration. And like even Lucy would probably be like, "What about your mum?" Um,
yeah.
so like, yeah, I feel like we're gonna meet if we meet Verona's mum, it's just gonna be this moment of, wow, okay, yeah, she just had no options.
Yeah, it's interesting that Verona's mum has never come up as an option, right? Like,
Yeah,
I think it's in the next chapter where we get a bit of Lucy being like, "Hey, you can come hang out at my place anytime, or we can figure something out. We can do this, we can do that." And Verona's mum is just not an option there, which means it's not an option because it's even worse of an option than her dad, which is crazy.
yeah. Like I think the only time we ever sort of hear her mum was, I think Avery briefly brings it up. It's like, oh, you're gonna have to go deal with your mum, or no, when Verona's like, oh, I can't stay here. Avery's like, oh, you're gonna
Mm,
go with your mum, and Verona's like, no, and it's just like it's so immediately dismissed or not even considered.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So Verona steals some money from her dad and leaves to go get the pastry that they talked about going to get. But while she's doing this on this errand for herself, she spots a strange-looking woman.
Yeah, and so before we get to the woman,
Yeah.
and as we sort of prepare ourselves for the conversation, Avery and Verona are going to have in the woods in a minute. I want us to talk about there's like this moment to me feels like a small example or a preview of like Verona going other, a bit
Mm.
like so she has this moment, she tries to connect with her dad, he fucks it up, and then she goes out alone at night. Like she basically comments like, oh, this must be what it's like to be an other. I'm on the outside, struggling to
Yeah.
eat my pastry, like observing the human folk. um
Classic other stuff.
but like, yeah, like she kind of is relishing how she is outside of things, like looking in, kind of devoid of emotion. And like at first I was kind of like, oh, like I still can't decide if I think this is meant to be a good or a bad thing, but I think we get
Mm.
some more conclusive parallels later on. But like you can see how much less miserable she is in this
Mm.
mode than she was like at home, and how her home situation is pushing her in this direction.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's interesting. The thing that I really liked that you mentioned on it is she kind of clocks this woman, even without her sight. Like
Mm.
that's such a cool beat, right? Sorry, I'm realizing I'm skipping ahead a bit in the notes because you've mentioned, she clocks this woman. She shoots on her eyesight and notices that it's the winner, whose name we later learn is Bree. And this is exciting because this thread has been dangling for a little bit.
Yeah, I've been wanting to learn more about this.
How the fuck this person survived. And now we get the confirmation that they did have help. No, it wasn't Alexander, but yes, it was the Blue Heron Institute, I guess.
Sure.
Yeah, but you noted that Verona clocks her without using her sight, right?
Yeah, like she uses her sight to find out more about what's going on, but like she notices that this woman just seems out of sync, even without her sight on, which is for starters good thing because she wasn't even using her sight. So points for Verona for turning it off for once.
Mm.
But yeah, I mean, I was just curious. Like, do we think this means Verona is just sort of becoming more attuned to the world? That she just noticed this. Like, was it just obvious, or is this like another sign that she's becoming more other? That those lines are blurring for her.
Yeah, I really like that read. Like she's, we saw that she was switching on her sight constantly. It seems maybe she's just kind of got a bit of the sight just in her everyday,
Mm.
her everyday eyes, her regular old human eyes, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. Like I wouldn't be surprised to learn that that's sort of what's happening.
Mm. So yeah, Verona, realizes she needs help here, and so she calls out to Lucy, but Lucy's busy, so she goes with her second choice, Avery, which is tragic. Avery should be everyone's first choice. And Avery and Snowdrop arrive to help keep an eye on Bree.
Avery's never anyone's first choice. That's her defining character trait.
That's very sad, but true.
Yeah. So just to jump back a little bit, like I love how we kind of get the confirmation that she's the winner by seeing her true form, like through the sight. Like she's still, literally got blood on her hands. Like she's all sorts of fucked up through the sight, and it's only like in the real world that she looks so glamorous. And there's almost just this glamourish feel, like that it's a lie to how
Mm,
okay she is in the and she talks about it a bit later when they confront her next chapter. Or no,
mm,
it's this chapter I think. But yeah, well, there's that bit where she's sort of
yeah.
like, oh, it doesn't feel like I'm complete, or that part of has left me. And it's like, I don't think it surprises any of us to learn that the Hungry Choir's like boons were actually bullshit. And that doesn't just make your life perfect. Like there's this fakery to how okay you are.
Yeah, it did feel very fake. Yeah, no, I liked it, and you're right. We get this confirmation later that if the Hungry Choir is taken out, this like ramshackle, life that Bree has managed to cobble together post victory is just gonna collapse again. Like the Hungry Choir's, energy is the only thing that's keeping her, keeping it together for her.
Yeah, but like the fact that her like form in the sight, which is sort of like the true vision of things, is still
Yes.
bloodied and whole. Like she's. It just says to me that the any perfection that we sort of see in the real world is surface level. Like it
Yes.
doesn't extend
Yeah.
deeper, and that's probably where that empty feeling that she's got comes from. But yeah, as you said, like so Verona kind of it's interesting because it kind of seems like Brie wasn't actually trying to run away, but she somehow manages to. Um, and like this is all going on as Verona is thinking, I'm terrible at this. Uh,
Yeah, how does she get away? She just slips away from them, even though they're following her. She doesn't know she's being followed and isn't actively trying to avoid them. She just kind of somehow slips away.
Yeah, well, I think like it's a funny part of this is Verona is like talking about like, oh, like I'm bad at this stuff, and I think it's funny because especially next chapter, Lucy focuses on this a lot, but when we see Verona from the other's perspective, it tends to focus on how insanely good she is at like rocking things in this world, and she just has a bit of an instinct for it, and she
Mm,
obviously kind of acknowledges that in her own head too, but like as with sort of anyone, I think her own headspace focuses a bit more on her weaknesses. Like whenever these action scenes come up, half of her monologue, internal monologue, is just like, "I am not good at this. Like I'm not the action hero. Why isn't Lucy here?" Uh, I don't know. It's kind of like interesting and it's good to see like her sort of admitting her own faults, but like it's just so interesting the way that this dynamic works with the three of them and how like Verona's very much coming from this place of this is not me. I wish one of the others was handling this. Whereas we see from Lucy's perspective next chapter, Lucy has this sense of Verona is the one who is really good at all this.
mm, mm. Yeah, yeah. There's an interesting beat. The fact that Verona naturally groks this stuff is really interesting to me because I wonder. we are starting to see um, Lucy and Avery have their own niches start to get carved out for them. Like
Mm,
Verona just seems to be the one who gets the general practice the best. But Avery is starting to get this like escape artist theme to her, right?
sure.
Whenever he comes in, Snowdrop talks about how Avery has been being shown by Snowdrop and the goblins like weird hiding spots and weird like methods of movement. With like a goblin hidey hole that she can travel through, and she's obviously got the escape rope and all these other things that let her just like move around in funny ways. I love that despite Verona taking an early lead, the others are becoming like having these really weird little niches that I like.
Yeah, and let's talk about that more when we get to the end because I pulled out a pale predictor thing that's actually somewhat related to this.
Okay.
But yeah, I completely agree, and I think it's gonna be really interesting to see where Verona ends up, considering. Like I can't help but draw the parallel to Verona thinking, "Oh, I'm not good in action," to what Nicolette was saying about how, oh god, what are the Bellingers? What are the augurs? Um,
Yeah.
how augurs they're not meant to be in action. Like they are meant to be
Yeah.
sort of prepared. Like if you end up in action as an augur, it means you've already fucked up.
Mm.
So I can't help but sort of draw links like that. And Verona likes solving the puzzles. Although she also doesn't because she doesn't care about things like the Carmine Beast beyond treating
No.
it like a puzzle. I
Yes.
think she actually says in this chapter, she's like, I just want to solve it because no one else could, which is actually probably a very practitionary way of thinking about it as a problem. She doesn't actually care about solving things. She's just
Yeah.
like, "Ooh, I can win."
Well, I think it is her. She is like naturally curious as
Yeah,
well, right?
she's a cat.
Yeah, she and we all know curiosity is great for cats. But it's not that she wants to solve it for the reason of solving it and figuring out who the murderer is or whatever. It's because she just kind of wants to solve things to gain knowledge.
Yeah, whereas like Lucy has seen an injustice or like a murder,
Yes,
and she wants to bring people to account for that.
resolve it. Yeah,
And
totally.
she sees it. She comes at this very much from like a duty perspective, whereas
Yeah.
Verona's like, "Oh, riddle."
Yes, we can learn things and use it to gain power over people.
Mm. There's also the bit, and I just want to bring this up. Verona is like trying to track down. This is before Snowdrop and Avery have shown up. She's trying to track down
Mm.
Bray, and she just asks a weird meat man for directions, and then gets them, and then later on laments that there are no good bits of meat to ask.
That was so weird when she did that. I did a double take because I was like, wait, did she just talk to one of these like meat plastic sheet things? Is that like, and that's the perfect way to represent how far she is sliding into this world.
Yeah, especially because like I don't think I'd fully grasped how horrifying these things were, even at the point like remember a couple of I think it was the start of this arc when Verona was
Mm.
like, for the first time, the bloody pieces of meat in cocoons had started to feel ominous. And then we get like more details on how fucking weird and terrifying they are here, and I'm just like, so we're back to these things just being cool and not ominous because this
Yeah,
sounds
being
scary as
being
fuck.
BFFs.
And yeah, like
Yeah,
there's no hesitation. She just sees this like weird writhing meat person wrapped in like this plasticky veil stuff, and she's like, "Hey, did you see a girl go past here?"
yeah. I mean, it seems to be. It doesn't give her any useful information, but it seems to be like in a helpful mood,
Well,
right?
points her in the right direction.
Yeah, right. Like, is that just a thing? She's gonna just have these like weird. I mean, I guess they're spirits, right?
I assume so.
These
Yeah,
like flesh spirits that she can just like chill out and chat to.
yeah. I mean, I guess.
Um, so Verona and Avery have a bit of a bonding moment as they're tracking down Bree, bonding over basically the deterioration of their own lives. Before Verona drops the bomb that she's planning on becoming an other.
Yeah, yeah. So before we get there, I do want to touch on a bunch of things. Like, first of all, I find it interesting that Avery turns out to be such a good tracker because I thought,
Mm.
aren't deer the ones that usually get tracked?
Get tracked. Yeah. Ah,
Like, I wonder if
interesting.
it's just deer imagery is associated with tracking and that's good enough, or whether I should now be worried about Avery getting chased down by something. Um, but yeah,
Yeah.
I did want to touch on, like, as you said, like, they sort of bond over both of their kind of terrible home lives at the moment. And I just had to quote this one line. Um, where Verona's talking about what just happened with her dad, and she says, "Yeah, the usual, pretty much. Just this was maybe the last straw." And then Avery asks what happened, and then the next the next line is, "Verona saw blood. She pointed and then tracked the trail off to the side." Just, that's such a cheeky little bait and switch. I love that. Um,
Yep.
I just love the imagery in these stories, how it just gets to be so direct. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's like in your face in a way that it's like on the nose in a way that is very delicious.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, Verona tells Avery that she's thinking of not sticking around is the euphemism she decides to use before elaborating that she means she's thinking of becoming another. And before we start talking about that, Avery, great stuff. Avery, good work. She's like very non-judgmental and doesn't freak out at Verona, which you could and theoretically should. But she responds in a very good way where she is supportive, expresses concern, but listens and doesn't like make it so that Verona can't talk to her about this, which is very important if you're going to kind of bring her back into the world of humanity eventually.
Yeah, especially because like I was so relieved when this started happening, because like Verona has no one else she can talk to this about. Like just immediately off the bat, it's related to the practicey stuff, so that brings things down to the Kenneteers and the others.
Yeah.
The others are out, as we established at the start of the
Yes.
chapter, and knew anyway. And so it's like down to Lucy and Avery. She can't talk to Lucy about it because they're sort of too close. So Avery, as the new friend, is. I was just like, oh, thank Christ. we I needed this so bad to hear Verona actually bounce it off someone. And I agree. I thought Avery handles it like very well, just sort of like reacting and not trying to lay down any judgments too soon, just kind of poking and prodding at the idea.
Mm,
Um I-
yeah, like don't shut down the conversation. Let Verona
yeah.
talk to you about it, but don't enable her. Like she walks that line, quite a tough line to walk, but she walks it. She walks it well.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I also think we should talk on Avery's situation that she sort of outlines here, because like that's it's not nothing either. Like essentially, as we already knew, Avery's fucking traumatized by all the shit that just happened to her. And she just can't rely on her family for support. Her siblings just aren't equipped to give it to her, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. But also, like, her parents don't give it to her, and so like her grumble was really the closest thing she had to a rock of support in the family, and that's currently the sore spot.
Mm,
And just sort of hearing her outline this, I was just like, like all she's got at home really is Snowdrop, and that's barely counts as like as home. um
yes.
and I love how Verona is sort of like, you need to fight for this. Like it's sort of this circles back to what Verona was thinking about how long things have been miserable with her dad. She's sort of like, don't let this pattern get etched in. Like you have to fight for this, otherwise you'll end up like me and my dad, which doesn't seem recoverable. And I like that so much, as like, like I think we've both had, and then the girls bring it up, like Lucy and Verona have now both sort of had these moments with Avery where they're like, I have been through something like this. Here is my advice on how you should handle it. And I feel like Verona's very much comes from this place of, I wish I had done something. Please don't make my mistake, which is rough
Mm,
because she was 12, 13. Like she shouldn't have had to do anything, but um,
yeah.
at least she's around to try and stop it happening from others, even if it wasn't actually her fault.
Yeah. 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 Oh, it's sad. It's such a sad, I don't know, beat. That
Yeah.
it's a sad plot line. I don't think there's a good resolution for this Verona turning into another stuff.
No, and that's why I'm so fascinated to see where it goes, because I can't picture it myself, and those are the most interesting storylines. Um,
Mm.
yeah, and so I guess yeah, to talk about the Verother thing,
Yeah.
like that, because she has this one paragraph where she kind of outlines to Avery how she's feeling about it, or what she's thinking. It's like, oh, she kind of toys with it as this idea of an escape, but it's not real, but she's doing it more and more, and she's worried it like will become more and more real. And at least to me, that just like that just drew to my mind to like suicidal ideation, and
Yeah, for sure.
like really, I guess any preparation for any big drastic or violent action, I suppose. But like, I guess this
Yeah.
was just sort of what made me sort of lock in as I definitely don't think we're meant to view Verona turning into another as a good thing at this point. Like, she sort of outlines,
Mm.
she knows this isn't going to fix things. It's like all of the others have jobs and work and stuff they have to maintain in their own way, but she's sort of like, but I'll lose humanity, I'll lose my feeling, and that's what she kind of wants from it at this point. And it's just like, oh fuck.
Yeah, it's the more she lets herself think about it, the more it normalizes it for her, right?
Mm.
It's yeah, I don't know. I don't like where it's going. It definitely it feels like the euphemisms that she uses to describe it are the kinds of euphemisms you would use for, suicide or death. And that's an intentional choice by Wabo to make it feel like it's an end to Verona's
Yeah,
life as we know it,
yeah.
right? Like,
Like that concern of the escalation from something you just sort of dream about to an idea that becomes more and more real, like, is exactly that sort of thinking. Which, yeah, like, feels designed to make us worry about it.
yeah, yeah. I don't know. Like, I can see a read on this where it's not a bad thing that she turns into another, right? Like, where it's her
Yeah.
becoming, I mean, like, becoming Lucy's familiar, and it's like a sitcom. It's called Two and a Half Humans. And, but the way that it's described by Verona in her head and the way that it's described by Walbo, it doesn't feel like that's what it is.
Yeah, and just the way we see all of the others around here, like, it just doesn't seem like something to aspire to that much, I guess. Like, Miss seemed like the coolest and the happiest, and even she wasn't that. But like, like every other in this town is their own kind of miserable and empty.
Mm, yeah. Yep. Including Verona.
Fair.
Hey. Um, so just quickly, I thought this was weird. I don't know. Did you think this was weird? There's this bit where they're talking to Snowdrop and she's got a new shirt, and I'm just going to read it out because I don't know. Maybe this felt weird to you, but it just seemed a little strange to me. This section, so I'll read out
Okay.
the quote. Um, Love the shirts, Avery said. Where do you get them? Verona asked. www.palewebserial.wordpress.com/merch, Snowdrop squeaked. The prices are really high and the quality is terrible. Did that seem weird that Wildbo just inserted an ad for his merch into this story, or?
Oh, if only I could say yes, it did.
But seriously, I
Yep.
I fully expect this. It must just be Wildbo is about to try out the new merch features that are on Patreon, right? Like, I can't imagine Snowdrop exists for any other reason.
I'm gonna make this the last time I sort of do this, because otherwise I'm gonna be doing it forever. So it just one final time, please, Wobbo, if you're listening, consider
Yeah,
selling Snowdrop t-shirts. I will buy all of them.
he
But I'm
must
gonna
be
I'm gonna
thinking
stop.
about.
I'm gonna stop talking about it now, because otherwise I just feel like we're gonna be pressuring and annoying him. But yes, I would. God, oh my God, I would buy Snowdrop merchandise.
I just want what is it? I have style, I have class, I scream at own ass. Shit, it's so good.
I thought Post
Oh
Off in
boy.
the next chapter is my new favorite.
Post off. Post off is good. Um uh we learn a bit more about Blunt. We're
Sorry,
jumping
yeah.
around here a bit, but that's fine. We learn a bit more about Blunt Munch. We have some Blunt Munch time, some quality Blunt Munch time. So
Finally.
first of all, he explains how to make a goblin ward, which is basically like you get a rodent or a small round animal, and you basically turn it into like a fart bomb, is right? That you then like listen for. So
Yeah,
that's fun.
yeah. It's basically what if mines, but horrifying and grosser.
Yeah, and then
It's
there's this other
hilarious.
bit. There's this other bit where Blunt Munch reveals that he can like summon other goblins by spitting into his hand and sticking it in a tree. And I'm just kind of like, man, goblins are the best thing that Wildbow's ever come up with. Like, you can talk about the difference between the Wildbow works and which ones you like more and stuff, but I do think objectively it is correct that goblins are the best creation that Wildbow has come up with.
I love the bit where Blonde is introducing them all with the polite variants of their names, and there's one where he still uses the word snatch.
Yes.
And Toad Swallow scolds him by saying, "So disappointing! I told you to mind your mother molesting manners." Which is just like, Toad Swallow, my dude.
Yeah,
I don't.
just well, yeah.
I don't think you're doing so hot on that front yourself right now. Yeah, it's so funny. And the idea that Snatch is the child friendly version of that name is also kind of equally hilarious. I love how we're hiding. There's just an extra layer of joke to the goblin names when we know we're getting like the cleaned up versions.
Yep, yep.
Also, I love
I
that
love the goblins.
Blunt Munch has to pay them double if it's not a fight.
I know, I laughed at that too. Goblins are the best. How can you not love them? They're so good. There's this bit
Yeah.
later, I'm just going to say it now, when they're in the fight with Zed and he tries to drive away and just one of the goblins is lying under the tire and the tire is just like, it's trying to drive over him but getting no purchase on this goblin's skin. I burst out laughing at that. It's fucking amazing. Like, fuck,
Except it is
goblins are the
getting traction on the granny panties that it's wearing,
yes, but they're
which
not.
ride
They're
up, but
magical
they don't
granny
tear.
panties. Don't tear. Stupid. So fucking stupid. I love it. Anyway, so Verona and Avery catch up to Bree, who's in the company of Zed, this totally tubular technomancer, who's, of course, curious about Kennet. And they try unsuccessfully to dissuade him from further investigation.
I feel really bad for Avery and Verona here because they go to all the effort right before they confront him. They like dress up in their silly witch outfits, like
Yeah,
trying to
the
come off
Halloween costumes.
as
Yeah.
proper witches. And then this dude just slams any of that professionalism down by introducing himself as Zed, apprentice to Rad Ray Sunshine, which is the most fucking wizardiest name I've ever heard.
I mean, it's ridiculous, right? Like the vibe of Zed and Rad Ray Sunshine and all this stuff is like it's so
It's so
good.
cool.
Yeah, it's great. The fact that this person is a serious threat and drives around fucking playing cassettes in a Walkman or whatever, like
yeah, well, I think we'll talk about this at length when we get to the extra material at the end. But yeah, it's such a cool aesthetic. I instantly kind of just liked Zed, and I was like, I hope we see more of him. So I was very excited when 3.7 ended, and I was like, cool.
yeah. Yeah, so they have this encounter with Zed, and we should touch on the fact that Zed is now the second practitioner that is curious about Kennet, and it's just going to keep happening, right? Like, I think we've gotten past the point where Kennet can remain a secret, even
Yeah.
without Alexander's thing going off in 5 years, right? Zed is now curious, and it just feels like the secret's out. They're like fighting against an avalanche, right?
Yeah, I think the moment the Carmine Beast died in the town, that was settled. There was maybe a shred of a chance when Miss was running things, but again, the second Miss left, it was just like I think we talked about this last week. It was just like, I just don't see how there can't genuinely be a belief among the Kennet others that a long-term solution is to try and stick to their current status quo and it'll work out. There's just it feels like there's no way that could possibly happen. They're not going to get left alone. I feel like somebody must be sitting on presumably a Carmine Beast shaped silver bullet, and they're just biding time. Like, they can't honestly believe they can do this forever. Somebody must be kind of like, hey, if we can just do this for 2 more weeks, I can do XYZ and then it will be fine.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't know what they're waiting for, right? Like, whatever has been put into place now is clearly far enough along that it's self-propagating, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and as you said, like, there's too many eyes looking in on the town now. Like, it's just they can't expect all that attention to go away even after the Carmine Beast stuff is settled.
Yeah. I don't know. The other thing is we'll get into this a bit more in the next chapter, I guess. But the Kennet others feel like they're acting like this is salvageable still.
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah.
Maybe it's not, because John does say, "Hey, this is going to be our life now," like multiple times a day. Potentially, this is going to be our life. So maybe they are kind of getting it, but it doesn't feel like they're acting in a way that is consistent with things. Things are at this point.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why I have just come up with the theory that at least some of them are sitting on the whole plan all along with what was happening with the Carmine Beast or something, because that makes more sense to me than these guys just being like, yeah, this is salvageable.
Yeah, maybe that is it. I don't know. So I guess we'll talk about Zed's specific like powers in the bonus bit, right? When
Hmm.
we talk about some of this stuff more. But a fight breaks out between Zed and his techno ghosts versus the goblins and John and Avery and Verona. I guess in order of effectiveness. Noah, would you put goblins above John or John above goblins? I think
Oh,
goblins won the day, didn't they?
yeah, but like you could argue that's because John was keeping like the
Was keeping
static mullet
Mustachio busy. Yeah.
thing in check. Like that seemed like the most powerful thing. So it's kind of
Wait, hold on. I've just got to stop for a second here, Elliot. Have you ever seen the show called Regular Show?
I know of it. I haven't actually
Okay.
watched it.
Because I swear to God, maybe someone else posted this on Reddit in response to the chapter as well. But Zed and his like techno 80s ghosts feels like it's literally right out of Regular Show. It was crazy to me. It felt like it's a very tubular kind of show where
Okay.
they literally fight ghosts of a cassette tape at one time. Whatever, it doesn't matter. But I just thought it was great. I just thought it's a really fun vibe for a fight. And
Yeah,
I really enjoyed it.
I got massive. There's that one episode of Doctor Who with the evil static people. That's sort of the vibe that I had in my head during this, which is a bit more
Mm,
50s than 80s. So I know it's not like spot on, but like yeah, just this whole 80s vibe. We'll get into it, but it's so much fun. Um,
mm.
but yeah, it's a cool fight.
Yeah, although it really struck me. I mean, especially Verona, but also to an extent Avery. It really struck me how powerless they are in this engagement. Right, Verona has a few tricks, but it's mostly John and the goblins carrying the weight. And the other thing is, the tricks that Verona and Avery do use are just ones that have been given to them by the goblins mostly, or John or Edith or whatever. So again, if they're going to come up against these Kennet Others, they just have nothing in their pocket that they can use.
Well, yeah, because I think that's the interesting thing about the practitioner other dynamic that we've sort of started to explore in the last arc. So it's like the others are the ones who actually have the power. Like the practitioners bind the others and then use them, but like I don't think we've actually seen a practitioner like directly confront someone, right? Like it's always through others.
Mm,
Maybe the exception here would be Nicolette, who was arguably a tool of Alexander's. Um,
yes,
but
and
she's
also runes don't quite fit into that, but they don't seem super strong anyway. So
yeah, and you're still sort of accessing the spirits. It's like
yeah, true.
it kind of feels like the spirits and the others are the proletariat actually doing the work, and then the practitioners just sort of sit there and reap most of the
Reap the
benefits.
benefits. Yeah.
Um, yeah, because like I agree, like this fight, like Avery zips around and does some cool shit, but yeah, I mean we already sort of touched on like Verona is not an action hero. She kind of wanders around and is like, what would Lucy do?
Mm, mm, yeah. Um, where are we up to? Oh, sorry. Cool. So, the okay, let's touch on this because this is the funniest part as well. There's this bit where a car comes past, and it literally is um like when kids are playing cricket in the street, and a car comes and everyone has to quickly grab the ball and go stand to the side so that the car can pass before they can get back to playing. It's ridiculous, right?
Yeah, this is like a bit of a trope in particularly urban fantasy or anything where there's like a secret underworld
Yeah.
thing, like civilians ignorantly passing through and stopping the epic underworld fight where like everyone has to pause. Fuck, it's even a Toy Story thing.
Mm.
Where you have this epic fight going on, and just some like ignorant civilians are just like, oh hey guys, what's going on? And everyone's holding knives behind their back, and then the second they're gone, like the fight just kicks
You get
straight
back
back
to
into
the
gear.
fight. Yeah.
Like it's a trope I'll never get sick of. Like it's funny every time.
It was very funny. I really loved it. And the way he said is kind of like a bit put off, and he's like, you should put up connection blockers so that doesn't happen. And Verona, whose response is like, well, you shouldn't trespass, so
Yeah.
fuck you.
Yeah.
No, so this kind of causes a break in the fight, and then the negotiations reopen. And wow, this Blue Heron Institute like students and teachers can't attack each other rule has really come in handy for this group.
Yeah, that was a good call. But I believe it's Verona who's sort of like, hey, do you go to this school? Like, good idea.
Good
Um,
get, yeah.
but like, I mean, that's the whole like this whole thing of like Blue Heron Institute students can't attack each other. Like it's such bullshit because it's this like facade of cooperation, but like
Yes.
we've never seen two students associated with this institute like give any signs that there's any sense of cooperation. It's more this like mutually assured success thing where it's like you can't actively hurt me too much directly, but like still try to undermine me and everything. Like it's the most toxic bullshit rule.
Mm, yeah.
But it does keep
Um,
working. You're right. Like
I mean,
it's
it's
working out
great.
so far.
Yeah. I think this is the best thing for them so far. This is the thing that has saved them in two different encounters. Is rules technicality. We're both students,
Yeah, but it's
so
like
fuck
okay,
off.
so the only reason we're not trying to kill each other is because we're both affiliated with this school. Like, oh, this is a great state of affairs.
Yeah,
Like, we
and
should,
thus the
we,
balance was
yeah.
restored.
Like, if the only thing stopping everyone from killing each other is this rule associated with this school, like, I don't consider this a stable situation.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's not. Yeah, and really, that's the impression that you leave this chapter with, right? Is the fact that this whole Kennet situation is just too far. It's the cat's out of the bag, right?
Yeah.
There's no way it's going to be a secret.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, we already sort of touched on this, but I wait. The garden, or what was it? The ecosystem. There's new stuff in the
Yeah,
biome now. Like, or the biome's fucked. We need to change something. We need a
yeah,
new garden strategy because this one is going to get infected.
yep. So yeah, and that's where we leave 3.6. On to 3.7, out on the limb 3.7, which begins, and we're in Lucy's perspective. And Lucy and Verona are keeping an eye on the bed and breakfast, just in case Bree comes back. And as they're just chilling, keeping an eye on it, Rowan enters the music store where they are hiding out. Oh, wait, are they in a music store? They're just in a kind
Yes,
of they're in a
yeah,
music store.
it's a
Okay,
music
cool.
store. Yeah.
Which is honestly the right kind of place, because I can imagine Zed would, if he's going to go anywhere, it's going to be a music store.
Exactly. I love the opening like line to this chapter because it's just sort of like Lucy looking at this woman shambling with all sorts of bits of metal coming out of her, and because I did like a triple take with this one, I was like at first I was like, oh my god, is this some crazy other that's been let loose on them? And then I realized, and then they started talking about the music store, and I'm like, oh my god, is it just some woman with piercings? And then
Mm,
then I realized it would have been specified this was Lucy's site, and actually we're seeing like what I assume is some sort of like meth addict or something, who like just has like a bunch of wounds, and those are manifesting in the site as a bunch of swords sticking into her, which is just tragic. But like it did such a good job of putting me back in the Lucy mindset, like, and because this is something that we sort of have to do in every chapter of this story, is sort of put ourselves back in a mindset. And I was immediately like this opening paragraph and the confusion and the violent imagery. I was immediately like on in danger mode, and then I sort of realized it was harmless, but not quite though.
yeah.
Like, and I think like that's just it just put me in the Lucy headspace because I was like on a sort of not full alert, but like always kind of skeptical of everything around me because of that confusion at the start.
Yeah, I had the same vibe too, and it is. I guess it's just being in Lucy's head means you're always a bit more tense and on edge. There's this later bit where some random a drug addict from outside the B and B just like starts moving up to her to like with purpose. And it's very much. It just feels like Lucy is in danger constantly,
Yeah.
which is crazy. But that's the
Yeah.
headspace that that's what being Lucy is like, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that intentional confusion that the opening lines have, like, sort of just helps get you in that headspace because you're like, "Are we in danger?" No, I mean, not well, not no, but not as much as I thought. But like, okay,
Yeah,
like I'm on edge a little bit.
yeah. An interesting beat that I noticed on my second read through was we get this part with Laurie, who is Rowan's girlfriend, and she's basically uh trying to promote like assisted suicide, right? Like she's
Yeah,
pro euthanasia for the elderly. Which we don't have to get into the politics of that, but I just think it was interesting considering that last chapter we
oh
touched on
no,
the idea of Verona and
hello.
her what is essentially suicidal ideation, and now we have Laurie who is promoting assisted suicide. There isn't a concrete link there, and the characters don't connect on that level. But I think this is potentially an interesting way for Verona to poll Lucy's thoughts on this in a more roundabout way.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because, like, at least for me, and this probably isn't a debate we need to have here or anything, but like,
Mm.
I see euthanasia in terms of, like, the elderly with or people with terminal illnesses as kind of a different thing to like something like Verona's situation, but
Sure.
yeah, I guess I see the connection. Like for me, this more sort of started to jump out. Like it does sort of touch on, like I guess some of the justice stuff, because part of justice is obviously like your free will or your right to choose various things. That's sort of all interrelated to any sort of justice system, because part of justice is determining what is a crime and what needs justice to be served on it. So it'll be interesting to see if
Mm.
this ties into anything. But it definitely establishes, like, primarily, immediately establishes Laurie as someone Lucy can like, because she's one of these people who actually likes to do things.
Yes,
Um,
she's proactive.
yeah, exactly. Like she doesn't just like to talk about herself. She's actually pursuing a cause. Which so Lucy's immediately like, I like you.
Yeah, defs. Good on her.
Yeah. But to touch on what you were saying about Lucy and Verona, I mean, there's some real ominous stuff where Lucy's like looking at Verona and thinking on her, and there's these lyrics to the song that she's listening to, which are basically all going on about like, oh, I miss you and I, and
Mm.
oh, I hope you understand why I couldn't stay. And it just felt like this really ominous foreshadowing.
Yeah, I'm sure it's fine. I'm sure it'll be nothing. Don't worry about it, Elliot. Probably.
Yeah, just after we have like Verona start talking about it to Avery, then suddenly Lucy's chapter's giving us mad these two are drifting apart vibes. I'm sure it's nothing.
Yeah. Um. Yeah. So Lucy and Verona get into a conversation with Rowan, and they basically call him out a bit on some stuff that he does, where he's not quite being a good big brother, but he wants to get cred for being a good big brother, which I thought was funny.
Yes, well, I'll touch on this a lot more, but like Rowan wants credit for not being a bad big brother. Basically,
Yes, exactly.
he conflates not being bad with being great. And I
Which,
mean
I
that.
mean, they do have Kerry and Sheridan, who are both quite annoying.
Yeah,
Not to
exactly.
mention the other boy whose name I've forgotten, but I think it's like Dylan or Declan.
Declan.
He,
Yeah.
he's annoying as well. So
Um.
by that metric, Rowan is the best sibling.
Yeah, exactly. But again, best does not mean great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. I just sort of measure like Laurie to me seems introduced as someone who's like proactive and does things, and that's good.
Yes.
And that's basically, I think, largely introduced to introduce Rowan as not that.
Yes.
He,
He's passive as heck.
yeah, exactly. Like he doesn't do anything bad, but he doesn't do anything good either. Like he just
Yeah, he doesn't do anything bad because he doesn't do anything.
Yeah, exactly. And like there's this really great bit where Lucy's sort of thinking about how most adults have like daggers of some kind. Like everyone is
Yeah.
carrying some sort of damage and emotional baggage. And she looks at Rowan and Laurie has some of her own, but Rowan is just kind of pristine and he maybe has some around the edges of him. Like he's got this faint bit of pain to his aura, but like mostly it's just
Mm,
pristine. And I think that's
mm.
really what this bit is establishing and what we're doing with Rowan here. Is he's just like he hasn't had to fight, like so he just kind of doesn't get it. Like I'd say his crime is probably obliviousness more than anything else. Like he just sort of doesn't
Yeah.
get it. He hasn't had to do anything, so that's why he's just sort of content with like, oh well, just keep doing it. Like it's not wrong. Things are
Yeah.
fine right now.
Yeah.
Um,
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. From his
yeah.
perspective, right?
Yeah, and like there's this great moment where he almost makes a good point about like he's like, oh, I don't want to like drown or smother Avery by like constantly like asking her how she is.
Yeah.
And there was a brief moment where I was like, okay, that's not a bad point. Like I can see why he would think that at least. That seems fair. And then they're sort of like, oh well, we think she'd like it. Why don't you do it? And he's like, oh well, then I don't have to do it to the others. And it's just, that seems like a whole lot of work. And I was just like, well, never mind, you fucking idiot. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, like he's just, I really like how because we see more of him here than we've seen in any of the Avery chapters, and I think that that's
Yeah.
like very deliberate. Like it's kind of like he doesn't interact with Avery because
Yes.
particularly Avery is someone who some like people need to go and interact with her, and if he's not going to step up. Like he's introduced this great example of I guess privilege, and we're going to talk a lot about that later on in the chapter, I think. But like he just doesn't get it.
Yeah, no, he definitely doesn't. Although it really emphasizes again how great this trio is and how dependable their relationship with each other is. Like Lucy and Verona here basically are the perfect defenders of Avery, right? Like even though it's not a thing, it's not a thing that she's asked or anything. They basically played the situation perfectly, pushing Rowan, in my opinion, just the right amount to actually force him to actually think about, how are you treating Avery? Is that something you actually care about? And it's
Yeah,
not it's
would
not
doing
overly
something
pushy.
help?
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah,
I
I
love
agree.
they're great. They're like the wholesomeness between these three is just so perfect.
Yeah, I agree. Like, it's always so great how these three just seem to immediately stick up for each other, without
Yeah.
hesitation and have each other's backs. It's always heartwarming. And let's just forget the weird lyrics thing I was talking about before. The three of them together forever. It's fine.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll be fun. Cool. So Lucy and Verona start to head off to a meeting with the others, and they bring in Snowdrop and the goblins to cover for them at the B&B.
Yep, just a friendly reminder that Pop and Drop are just a match made in heaven. Like this weird greeting they have for each other where they stick their hands in the air and scream at each other was just I don't understand it, but it was fucking delightful.
Yeah, Pop and Drop are the best, aren't they? And well, yeah. So there's this moment I alluded to earlier where one of the drug addicts from outside the parking lot it has this moment of like coming at Lucy, like clearly coming at Lucy, and I don't know what it like. It felt like there's something up there. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was just meant to be, they're coming after Lucy because she's a little black girl and they're I don't know, a racist coming to enact some kind of violence on her. They get distracted by what is assumed to be a goblin, just kind of like, keeping an eye out for them.
That's what I assumed, yeah.
But I don't know. It feels like there's something more going on here. Like something karmically is going against Lucy here that just kind of makes this drug addict come at her.
Yeah, I agree. There was definitely. I tied it to the race thing as a theory as well, just because it comes after this moment where she sees a Confederate flag. Because
Yes.
what are you doing with that in Canada, for starters, you
I
idiot?
know, right?
Like
You didn't fight in the fucking American Civil War.
I have seen those in rural Australia as well, and it's very
Oh,
confusing because it's like not only is it disgusting, but it's
yikes.
not relevant here.
Yeah, there's
So
not even what do you what can you
yeah,
even hide behind? Like, oh, it's about their culture that I really want to support. Like it's
yeah, like
such nonsense.
Um, so like I agree that was where my mind jumped to, but like I agree with this moment. It feels like it's something, but I don't know what it is.
Mm.
Like it feels like one of those things. Put the pin in the chalkboard, or not the chalkboard, the corkboard, and
Don't put pins in your chalkboard, Elliot.
you just
What are
scrape
you, a
pins across your
monster?
chalkboard. It makes a great
Yeah.
noise. Yeah. So I get this feels like one of those things. You pin it on the corkboard and you watch for it because I agree. It feels significant, but I don't feel like we're equipped yet to talk about why this happened or what it means.
Yeah, yeah. So Lucy and Verona beam their way over to the meeting spot, getting some good sunburns along the way.
Yes. Don't slip, slop, slap with glamour. Apparently,
Yeah. Yes, this was fun. The fact that they just like, let's turn into light and beam our way there. Like, it's ridiculous, but why not? Why shouldn't you be able to do this?
because Marisica is a dark fairy.
Yes, sorry.
This
And
is.
light type attacks are super effective against dark type fairy. So, yeah, true.
I mean, again, this is just like one of those things in this world that I love so much because there's so many moving parts and it's so imagery based that I was like, oh, I don't understand why this is wrong. And then like the second Marisica was like, you used sunlight with my glamour. I was like, oh yeah, obviously because she's like a dark fairy. Like I just love how I can so often be caught off guard by things in this world because there's so many moving parts. I don't know what to expect. And then when it gets explained to me, I'm like, oh yeah, that was obvious.
Mm, yeah, yeah. It's the perfect kind of thing of like, yes, of course that makes sense. She's a dark fairy type.
Mm.
Pokemon. I don't know what I'm just thinking about what Pokemon type all of the Kennet Others are now. Anyway,
Oh, there's a discussion question. Lock
well,
it in.
okay, so we've got Dark Fairy for Marishka. I think Fighting Fairy for Gillum. Maybe some kind of Dark Psychic for Alpi. We've got Fire, obviously, for
For
Edith.
Edith, yeah.
Maybe Dark type, just plain Dark for Matthew. I think the Goblins would probably be Poison type.
I reckon
John
Matthew
probably
is
Fighting.
dark normal.
Dark, oh, Dark Normal. What a fun combo. Have we missed anyone? What other can others miss? Would probably have been a Ghost type, I think, realistically.
Yeah, I'd go with that. You did John, right? And the
I
goblins
think
is
I would put John as Fighting and maybe Steel secondary.
yeah, I like that. I like that. No
Um,
water types, huh?
yeah.
Edith,
Who?
keeping them out.
Edith can't stand them.
Um,
Now
anyway.
what were we talking?
Well, so we're talking about this failed attempt to be sunbeams. Um,
Yes.
I also want to bring up and ask what you thought. There's like this weird argument that Lucy and Verona sort of have as they start to get ready, where Lucy's kind of like, "Okay, let me show you how this works," and Verona's like, "Yeah, well, you have to show me because you've been hogging it." And then Lucy's like, "Well, it's my gift," and
Yeah.
Verona sort of gets all like, "Well, comrade." We should be sharing them. And Lucy gets it's weird. I'm both like Lucy gets weirdly territorial and Verona gets weirdly like entitled to them, and I'm wondering what you make of this little exchange.
Oh, I don't know. I think they're just it reminded me of the fight over Alpi as a familiar. I think it's just Verona wants to have all the toys, honestly, I think is where it comes from.
Yeah, it was just a bit curious to me that Lucy was so protective of it. I don't know. I like
Well, I would tie that back to the fact that Lucy is quite excited, or at least happy, and gloats a bit when she gets the glamour more than
mm.
Verona does. I think it is just like a bit
So it's a
of
bit
the
of an
desire to
insecurity thing.
exactly like Verona's the best at it, so why can't Lucy have something that's her own?
Yeah. It's just, wait, because we've had little bits of moments like this from all of them. Like there's Avery stealing the chocolate bar in Arc One. That's an old reference.
Yeah.
But there was a bit where they went to a convenience store last week and they pulled money, and then Verona went to keep the change, and Lucy was like, "Hey, you're going to share that, right?" And Verona just smiles at her, and it never comes up again. Um,
Not good at
so
sharing, Verona, is she?
yeah, well, I think all three of them have had moments where they haven't been great at sharing. I
Well,
don't know.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, and just the way the glamour works in this, I want to talk about as well because it's so cool. Like, so my understanding on this, and I don't think I got this 100%, but like the way you turn yourself into these things is you try to draw yourself to match them, but you particularly
Mm,
you sort of go into the gaps or the darkest bits or the lightest bits,
mm,
and the glamour kind of figures out what you're trying to become and sort of spreads. And so there's this interesting thing where like if you sort of start a lie, glamour just naturally gravitates towards filling in the gaps. Like I guess it's
mm.
sort of the same as when you turn into an animal. Like you just turn some bits of yourself into an animal, and then the glamour's kind of like, oh, okay, like and does the rest of it. It's just such an interesting property of it. Like it's such a fascinating tool, the way you kind of have to steer it. Like you could write a whole book where this is the only thing the practitioner has. Like they've just got an
Yeah.
unlimited supply of glamour and all the tips and tricks. Like, oh, you led it in slightly the wrong direction, and you're this type of cat instead of the other type of cat, and that's bad because X, Y, Z.
Yeah, I really love the glamour. One of the things I really liked about it is when Verona's complaining about her sunburn, Marisuka's like, no, no, don't do that because then it'll make it more
Mm,
real. And she immediately stops, and I'm like, damn, that's so cool. Like, it's the
yeah,
power of belief, like, made manifest.
yeah, and it's exactly what we saw with Nicolette, with her eyes as well. Yeah, I just love this way it sort of helps you to finish a lie. Like you sort of start telling. It feels very like Marisica. She just has to start things, and the glamour helps like complete it. Such an
Mm,
interesting idea.
mm, yeah. Um, love glamour. So yeah, the trio arrive at the meeting, and we start to hear how the votes played out, which
Whew.
is fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
Before then, there's this bit where Charles is upset because he's like, apparently I'm on the same tier as the creature who eats walnuts, shell, and all. And can I just say, Charles, you wish you were on Cherry Pop's tier. Cherry Pop is so many tiers higher than you, buddy.
Yeah, in what world is being the same tier as Cherry Pop a bad thing? Cherry Pop
Yeah.
is top tier. She's double
Yeah.
S tier.
Charles
Um,
wishes, to be honest.
but yeah, no, I mean, I do like the. the recurring joke of everyone just unnecessarily shitting on Charles just never stops being funny to me. It probably shouldn't be because it's kind of mean, but I always think it's funny. And maybe that, I'm just part of the problem. I also enjoy shitting on Charles.
Mm,
I'm falling into
yeah.
the karma trap as well.
Yeah. So yeah, actually, there's one other thing before we get into the results of the. There's one other thing I want to touch on here, which is there's this moment where Lucy, where when the others are kind of starting to talk about these votes and how they feel about the Kennet, about the practitioners, about the trio. There's this moment where Lucy feels like it feels familiar, and the familiarity that she connects it to is basically being dismissed and judged for, and we're left to imply, as at the hands of racism and prejudice, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's this interesting note that made me realize, like, yeah, that's the way that they are being treated. They're being treated like they are just being reduced to this label of, hey, you're a practitioner, and the things that practitioners do is bind others, and so that's that. And maybe that's unfair for the others to put on them, but also, in fairness, like if we bring up the concept of privilege here, as humans, they are privileged that can't be basically enslaved. And I love that Lucy is a lens, and Lucy's the prejudice that Lucy has experienced is a lens that we're using to kind of draw the parallel to the inherent kind of power dynamics of practitioner and other.
Yeah. I also love how it ties into the self fulfillment of a lot of this prejudice because these fuckers turned them into practitioners. Like,
Yes, I know. Oh my god, I just had that thought as well of like they're being judged as practitioners. Oh,
so
you folks are
you made them
practitioners. We
that.
can't trust you, even though we're the ones who literally got you to be this thing.
Yeah,
Like,
like it's ridiculous, and that's generally what most prejudice comes back to. So, I really like it as an example of that. But to go into what you said, like, yeah, it's this interesting thing because you can see from the other's perspective, particularly what we learned about, like from Edith and Matthew, where like how they're limited and how they can rise through the ranks, and
mm,
the way practitioners bind them. It's easy to see from the other's perspective why they would view the practitioners as like the privileged ones. But that's obviously not how like Verona, Avery, and Lucy see themselves in this axis or on many others. And like I think that's like the really interesting thing you could sort of explore here. Like I think privilege is something that comes in many dimensions. It's not like this binary, you have the privilege and this person doesn't. Like there's all these
mm,
sorts of angles to it, and it's like from this lens, they're privileged, and like obviously through another, like Lucy's an obvious example as a practitioner compared to others. You can see that as a sort of privilege she has, but then obviously like she suffers like racism in the town, so there's like another angle where you can view she doesn't have privilege, and like
yes.
it's just such a mess, and I think that that's something we can start to get into here.
Yeah, I really love the idea of these interesting power dynamics around Kennet. Like we touched on this with Nicole and the fact that the the Kenneteers here are like they've been handed immense power on a silver
Mm.
spoon on a platter, right? Like I don't know. I think there's a lot of really interesting power dynamics in this story that we're getting to explore.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like like Nicolette was another one. Like they seemed pretty privileged from her point of view, but that's not how they see it.
Yeah.
There's also like to sort of just move on to the Kennet others not being low on the rung here, because there's definitely this sort of sense of them being one of those immovable powers that be with this voting stuff. Like, so they to jump ahead to the results a bit, they require a unanimous vote to basically do anything. And
Yes.
there's this moment where Lucy's like, so let me get this straight. The majority of you agree that what the Hungry Choir is doing is bad, but because it wasn't unanimous, you're all going to sit on your asses and not do anything. And I mean, obviously that feels applicable to like a lot of the stuff that's going on right now in the world. And sort of like, again, of course, I had to be Lucy who starts to call that out because it's just like it's so frustrating when it's like, yes, most of us admit this is a problem, but not enough of us that we're going to do anything.
Yeah, not and it's there is a majority. It's just not unanimous. Like
Yeah,
fuck.
exactly. And there's just like, oh, well, it could cause more problems within our social circle if we do try to address it. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
people are dying.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I'm so sorry. It's going to cause problems in your social. It's going to make
maybe,
it awkward at the next
maybe
luncheon at
these,
Matthew's house.
yeah, well, maybe these shitheads who don't think it's a problem need to be like if they're going to fight it and if it's going to upset them, like,
Then
Fucking
yeah, have that
yeah,
fight. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Like they're okay
Um,
with all these people dying. Like fuck them.
yeah. Let's talk about the votes, shall we? So, first of all, the votes for teaching binding, it was only 3 yeses. I think Charles is probably one of those, and I'm curious who you think the other ones are. Maybe Matthew, Alpi, or the Fae?
Yeah, I've tried to think about this for a while. I think like Charles and Matthew are the two I'd be the most confident in, but like even then, like I don't
Yeah.
know. I think weirdly I'd actually put John as one of the yeses.
Yeah, interesting.
Um, I think things seemed like they really weren't great between them, but just some other moments in this, I really do think John actually trusts these three.
Yeah.
I hope I'm right about that. But
Yeah.
yeah, John would be my like surprise. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
The Fae are interesting because like you're right. Like I can't possibly try and get into the heads of the Fae and see where they're at. So that they're always, they're always going to have odds of at least 10-1 for anything, yes or no, because you
Yeah.
don't know what the fuck they're up to.
They could literally do anything.
Yeah,
It's just
exactly.
arbitrary from our perspective at this point.
I may as well
Um,
flip a coin.
yeah. So there was also the vote about dealing with the choir, which the majority was in support of, but 4 people voted against. Who do you think that is? I mean,
Yeah.
John, again, possibly here, given what comes out with the older thing.
So it's interesting. I would classify John as someone who. So obviously, we learned that he had started to figure out that it was Yolda.
Yeah.
And I mean, we don't know enough about his exact relationship with her, but
Yeah.
my instinct on him learning that the Hungry Choir is Yola would for him to be like, this is a bastardization of like a girl that I loved. Like, I would
Mm,
almost think he'd be more on team like fuck.
mm,
It's like it's like, would you shoot your friend if they got turned into a zombie? And it's
mm.
sort of like for me, it's like, well, that's not them. It's a
It's a zombie.
it's a,
Yeah.
it's a it's a bastardization of them. Like I would want to be killed if it was a zombie version of me because that's like worse than being dead.
Yeah.
So I could see
Yeah.
John actually being like very pro taking on the Hungry Choir.
So who do you think voted against it?
I mean, I'm still suspicious that some people are actually involved. Like, I know they all say no
Right.
here, so we're meant to
Yeah.
think they're not, but I just can't believe that this happened accidentally. Um,
Yeah.
and Charles can lie, so him saying no doesn't mean shit.
Yeah.
Uh, so I'd say like Charles probably a no, then whoever his co-conspirators are.
But if Charles is behind it, I mean, it's the most obvious thing for him to vote no here, right? Like, what possible reason does he have for voting no?
Was
Assuming
it
that
an
not
anonymous
all of the
vote?
I don't think it was anonymous. It
No,
wasn't
you're
it
right.
because they say that they don't want to reveal who it was to the trio, but I don't think they imply it was anonymous, unless I'm
Yeah, it's a
mistaken.
good point. There's room for it to maybe have been ambiguous, but I feel like it was anonymous, but it would have come up. So you're probably right. I don't know. Like like honestly, if Charles said no, like would they even care? Um,
Yeah, maybe. Maybe you're right.
I mean, yeah, like you've got to hear on the notes that you think the goblins, and I think that makes sense just because they're chaotic little fuckheads. Like
Yeah.
I could see them just
There
being
was a
like more
Reddit post as
violence.
well. There's a Reddit post as well that I liked where someone was like, if the Hungry Choir is gone, the goblins are the next most like brutish thing in
Sure.
town, and so they probably see the Hungry Choir. They could potentially see the Hungry Choir as a bit of a buffer on that, keeping the Overton window shifted as it.
Mm, mm. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
anyway, the last vote is the group unanimously votes to continue trusting and teaching the group stuff. So yeah,
Yeah. Like it's something.
it is. They voted on it. So if they voted on it, it was a potentially it could have been a no, but it wasn't. That's
Yeah, I mean the fact that it was seemingly unanimous is a good sign. Like we sort of talked
yeah,
about how, and Avery just brings it up here. She's kind of like, if you want us to like stay on your side and like we all want to be allies here. You're the ones who are like pushing us away and kind of making this not the case. And we talked a lot about that last week, so it's just kind of like good to see Avery just address it up front. And this is like the one sign that the situation between the Kennetiers and the Kennet Others is salvageable. The fact that all of them were like, okay, no, we should keep like helping them to some degree.
yeah, yeah. So obviously the group is not happy with these results, and Lucy speaks up and gives the Kennet others a piece of her mind. What a good
Yeah.
speech this is. She's really on the ball about all this stuff. And I love that she talks about some of the stuff way back from the start of this story with the awakening ritual, and she was like really on top of it. Like, I'm glad she's been on top of it from the get go because otherwise Avery and Verona would really be in trouble.
Yeah, yeah. I remember when Verona was like kicking Lucy for adding in those conditions during the ritual, and now we're just saying, "Oh, thank God." But yeah, you're right. And like you get, like this had to be Lucy. This had to be in a Lucy chapter because, like, what I love about this speech is this is basically Lucy's constant need to want people to like actually do things, and it's always
Yeah,
so good to see her just be like, "Can you fucking do it, please? Like, stop saying things and be proactive and try to make
yeah.
the world a better place. Stop being like, oh yeah, it does suck."
Yeah, I mean, she's basically just asking them to put their money where their mouth is, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
exactly.
I love that she points out, and the basic gist that she points here is the Hungry Choir were there at the awakening, but they haven't really participated, so she doesn't see them as, and she thinks she can rightfully go after them. She doesn't think they're protected by the deal to not go after any of the Kennet others in air quotes. Which, yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, although interestingly, something Matthew brings up earlier on is that like so the Kenneteers are getting like all these percentage points of powers from like every other in town.
Yeah,
And a big chunk of that is that they're also getting percentage of power from the Hungry Choir, who is like one of the most powerful things in town.
yeah.
So like by taking it out, they stand to significantly depower themselves. And I really, really liked that this was brought up and confirmed that it's happening because this makes it so much more important that the Kenneteers are still like, no, we got to take it out. Because I feel like what we see here is, and the criticism like we all sort of have of the Kennet Others here is, they don't want to like rock the boat
Yeah,
when it comes to the Hungry Choir, and it's like that's why they need the unanimous vote because they
yeah,
we don't want to upset things for the worse. And it's that sort of like in the real world, the reason you see people doing that sort of thing is because they don't want to lose where they are on the ladder. Like if you're not on the bottom of the ladder, you sort of have something to lose, and it causes you to be less likely to put yourself out there. And the Kenneteers aren't like that. Like they stand to lose a lot of their power base by going after the Hungry Choir, but they know it's the right thing to do, and they're still doing it. And like that's really important and really powerful to me.
Interesting. Yeah, I like that. I'm interested because the reason that they give for why they're not willing to go more aggressively after the Hungry Quiet is this, like, they're a part of Kennet, and whether we like it or not, they are contributing power and all this stuff, right? I don't know. Thinking about that and thinking about the fact that Edith in the very next little part says, if you go after the Hungry Choir, some of the others of Kennet might interfere. And I'm just kind of sitting with that and trying to think, who is it that is against this? Like, who is it that is so keen to maintain the status quo that they're gonna I don't know. Who do you think? I mean, because John is one that potentially jumps to mind because obviously he has a relationship with Yoda, but as you've mentioned, that's maybe the opposite of what that implies
It's
because
going to be
maybe
one or
he
the other, depending on
yeah,
his exact relationship with her and the Hungry Choir.
yeah.
Um,
But who else would be who like it brings me back to who are the four no's.
yeah,
I
basically.
just I don't know.
Like if somebody did do this on purpose, like with or without Charles's help, presumably it would be those people.
Yes. Yeah. Um
Uh,
so yeah, Yelda is confirmed Hungry Choir. Anything to say on that, Elliot?
Um, no, I mean we get more details, and I think it's interesting because it muddies the waters a lot. Like, it she was put into a doll and buried, and
Yeah.
that's just interesting. I mean, there's a sense like something that you see a lot in sci-fi and fantasy is this like like oftentimes the bad guys will be like an insectoid race because insectoids have a queen, and then you've got like a single target, like. You know what I mean? Like, so if you defeat the
Right, like a
queen, then the whole
weakness.
army
Some
forms.
weak point in this
Yeah,
creature.
or yeah, there's always like cut the head off the snake and the
Yeah.
and the
A
body
focal point.
dies.
Yeah.
And it's because like otherwise you can't defeat this entire
You can't
insectoid
defeat the
race.
Zerg if they're all independent, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, and that's sort of like that's sort of what we start to get here. Is it's like okay, there's some sort of core, like whatever form the older core takes, but there is
Yeah.
something we can now target.
Yeah.
And so like that's going to be the really interesting thing is seeing exactly what form that takes and how what they can do about it.
Yep, a creepy ghost doll. I'm sure that'll be fine. Yeah. So okay. So the trio then reunite with Snowdrop, who tells them Bree has returned and has been forcibly apprehended, let's say, by the goblins.
Yeah, I mean, I think they talk about this at the end of 3.6. It's like, if we find her again, we will take her prisoner and keep her there until like we can know what to do with her.
Yeah,
And there's, I think it's Avery who's like, that doesn't feel like a good guy move, and Verona's just like, yeah, but our other
it's
options are straight
better
up
than
bad guy
killing her.
moves.
Yeah. Yeah. So she's been kidnapped, taken, whatever. And we get this beat at the end where Lucy thinks, well, the specific wording is she thinks we'll try it their way. A partial binding is better than nothing at all. Which I just is vague enough that I wasn't fully sure what it means. But presumably they're talking about binding the hungry choir, right?
Yeah, because like the negotiations I had in 3.6 with Zed and Bree were
Yeah.
like Zed and Bree wanted to not quite disable it because they wanted Bree to
Yes.
keep the benefits.
Yes.
Um, so my interpretation of this is they're actually going to release Bree and team up with her and Zed to do it because the Kennet Others won't help them.
I'm
And
down with
I
that.
think that's the interesting new dynamic. Like I talked at the start of this episode, like I felt like we were setting up the dynamic and we want to shift it. And here it is now. Like I don't think the Kennet Others are going to be impressed that they're going to work with Zed and Bree to do something in town.
Well, we had the battle in 3.6 of Zed and Bree versus John and the Goblins, with Verona and Avery on the John and the Goblin side, and we might get a reversal of that where it's Zed and Bree
Right.
versus John and the Goblins, but now Verona and Avery have switched sides.
Yeah, yeah. So like, this is going to be really interesting. It seems like they're going to team up with them, and to what extent and exactly what that means is going to be fascinating to see.
Yeah, but that's the end of 3.7. Then we get the extra material for this week, which is confiscated items, which is a tour through Zed's trash, all the items that he gave to Bree, and the notes that he left for her about what they all do. And man,
Yes,
this is so full of juice.
yeah. It's this kind of little glimpse into the future. Like presumably part of 3.8 will cover the Kenneteers getting their hands on this stuff.
Yes,
That has been taken from Brie. I mean the style, like this bonus bit, just visually is oozing with this great like
yes,
80s and neon
God,
vibe.
yeah.
It's amazing.
I love the 80s Technomancer vibe to Zed. It's just so much fun.
Yeah, like I just technomancy as a concept is something I'm really excited to get into here because like the magic of this world has been established as something that's built on like patterns and meaning
Yeah,
and we touched on, I think it was Avery at one point was like, oh, I want a smartphone as my implement, and Miss was like, oh, like I wouldn't do that, they're new, so there's not as much meaning associated with them, and obviously you discard them, so they're kind
yeah,
of weak. And
yeah.
like that leads to this also thing, like the problem with technology in this world is it hasn't been around to stew in meaning as long as everything else. um
Yeah,
so
and
like that, I think that's why there's the 80s vibe to this stuff, because like, you know, a keyboard needs to have been around from the 80s to amass enough spiritual
like
stuff to be
spirits,
worth
yeah.
anything.
Yeah, I find that very interesting, the fact that he has to use old technology because, like, the older the technology is, the better chances are that it has, a spiritual juice to it. I think
Yeah,
that's
well,
great.
and like there was a bit when we went to the spirit world in Arc 2 where Albie sort of mentioned how the spirit world was sort of fundamentally changing, and I wonder if this stuff will sort of all tie together. Like we'll start to
Mm,
learn like technology is changing the shape of the world and presumably the shape of the spirit world, and like technomancy is definitely an angle to explore that through, because I mean, you know, if technology is what's changing the world and changing the spirit world, then the interaction of those two things is obviously important.
mm.
Um, and like as well, just it's like the other things, like so something like a computer bug. So one of these things here is a little computer bug that's actually like a card and a bug that you stick into a computer and it fucks it up.
Yeah,
And what I love about this is, aside from like the original instance of a computer bug, like the term does not usually have anything to do with bugs.
with insects, yeah.
Um, but this card has a picture of an insect on it, and so like the so many things in technology use real world metaphors to name them.
Mm.
um and like I'd be so interested to just explore the relationship between the real world thing and the metaphor that we use to name it in tech. So something like a computer bug, like how does drawing on insect imagery affect something that is meant to cause bugs in computers? You know, that's such a fascinating
Yeah,
angle.
yeah, definitely. I feel like there is a kind of thematic through line there, right? Because we also have the enter key, which is a key, but he calls it an enter key, which is great. But it's like adding power to these objects by giving them the, I don't know, the nomenclature of these computer terms or something. I don't know.
Yeah, it's like you're almost trying to draw on adjacent meanings to empower stuff that
Yes.
may not be as rooted in the world.
Yeah, I guess synonyms and homonyms seem to be a big part of this world just in general. So I guess that this is just an extension of that.
Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
it's so cool,
Um,
so cool. Like I can't wait to get into more of this stuff.
yeah,
Like
but that's
right
the end
now.
of our chapters. Yeah. So do you want to take us away with you wanted to dive into technomancy a bit more, right?
Yeah, this is going to be a pretty short bonus bit. I'm not going to lie, because I mean, unsurprisingly, technomancy, just as any sort of concept, it's pretty new, like technology. Like, because if you think about it, real digital technology, like, hasn't been big for long enough to really have been much of a thing. So like, even the term technomancy only first popped up in the 1990s, and it only applies to a subset of fantasy and sci-fi. So it's not super common. So this will be a pretty short one.
Yeah. Cool. Well, take it away.
um, so I think the main thing I wanted to sort of talk about here is there is like a thing in the real world that's actually sort of called techno paganism. So technomancy is what you call it in like D&D and or RPGs, like all these sorts of
Yeah.
things, right? Um, techno paganism is sort of a real world thing that sort of touches on this. So it's like a branch of like modern paganism. Um, and obviously, like the modern term for paganism is sort of like this wide umbrella term that really covers anything that's not a major world religion, like anything that taps into more old school belief systems. So whether it's multiple gods or I think we talked about. I don't know if we've talked about Impale. We definitely talked about it in Deep Impact, but animism,
Mm,
which is like the set of so animism is basically a set of ancient beliefs, and it was found pretty much around the world, and it was the idea that everything has spirits associated with it. So it's basically what we see in this universe here. Like animists would have believed that a rock has a spirit, and trees have spirits, and it's what you see in Pact. Animism is real in Pact, basically, and Pale. So techno paganism is sort of a very animist view of technology, and like these people sort of frame their understanding of technology through like what sort of spirits and stuff are associated with it. It's like
mm,
at its simplest, some people call like techno paganism. Oh, there's a pagan ritual that requires using a fireplace, but you use an oven, and that's technology.
mm,
So that's techno
mm.
paganism. But
Swapping it out.
yeah, but like I found some interviews, and these were fascinating to read with like proper techno paganists, and of course they all worked in the Bay Area, surprising no
Mm,
one.
of
Um,
course.
they had this view of focusing on how all aspects of modern living, whether it's smartphones or cars or roads, like have their own spirits, and trying to draw on that. So like there was this one interview with a guy who was like really big. He was like helping design core parts of the internet and stuff in the early 90s, and he was talking about how the spirit world in his sort of branch of animism is just a projection of human thought and imagination, and really that's all the digital world is like. So studying uh, the spirit world was helping him to study what the internet could be, by sort of studying what human imagination leads to. um,
Mm,
it was just fascinating to sort of see this lens of how people like using animism to applying ancient animism beliefs to technology, and then applying that to how they were building the early internet. And I don't really think anything he said turned out to be super relevant, um, based
mm.
on my quick skim of the interview, but it was just fascinating to learn this stuff's out there.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's just the next evolution of the kind of human belief in things that led to the rise of religion and stuff, right? Is humans have this desperate need to believe in things, and we believe in the things based on what we see around us. So why not start to have that be influenced by technology, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, reading these interviews, I'm unsure how many like techno paganists actually believe spirits would be like
Mm.
real, like they are in Pale. There's like real physical things you can manipulate, or whether it's just like a framework for how you view things, like viewing
But I
everything
think
as
that's the
having.
first step, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Like, in the emergence of a belief, the first step is, hey, what about this kind of way of seeing the world? And you kind of
That's fair.
you use it as a lens, but you don't actually believe it to start with, and then it kind of sinks in and starts becoming this thing that you give power to through your reinforcement of it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's an ironically it powers itself,
Yeah,
much like the
exactly.
stuff in animism that you're framing. Yeah, it's a good point. But yeah, so it was just interesting, like reading these perspectives, and even though I don't think a lot of these people genuinely believed in spirits, it was interesting seeing how they use it to frame like working on the technology that's ended up like reshaping like the planet.
Yeah,
But yeah, also there's a techno pagan in Buffy. That was a
cool.
fun fact that I came across.
Very
So
fun.
Matt, if you're listening, watch Buffy.
Cool. Good stuff.
But yeah, should we
Anything
should we
else?
jump straight into our discussion question? Actually, now that we've been talking about technomancy for a couple of minutes.
Sure, yeah. We wanted to do a discussion question. I just like this bonus material with Zed's confiscated items was my favorite that we've had so far. So I want to give people the opportunity to dive more into that. Or at least that's what I hope to get out of this discussion question.
Yeah,
Uh,
so our discussion question is: what piece of outmoded tech would you use as a technomancer tool, and what would it do?
mm.
So it's basically a design your own confiscated item discussion question.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I just want more people to come up with very cool, very cool techno shit. I think that's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah, absolutely. Like I'm trying to think of any other big tech things because my first thought when you wrote this question down was like thinking about like an Atari or something, like a game console back then. And then I was like, oh, you could have
Mm.
different ghosts in each cartridge, and then I realized that's probably just a shittier version of the cassettes because
Yeah,
like
true.
cassettes are a more popular like medium, so that's probably why
Yeah.
they host the ghosts better.
Yeah.
So I have to think of something outside of gaming, which would be tough, but I can do it.
I believe in you, Elliot. Yeah. Should we jump back to our pale predictors?
Yes. So what have you brought?
So these are our predictions from the community, obviously, that were left in the pale prediction spreadsheet, which you can find in the link down below. I brought a prediction from a user called Dancing Anatolia, who talks about. Well, I'll read out their prediction. They say Zed is one of or the sole contributor to the Hungry Choir preparation website. We know he's been researching ways to make the choir weaker, and he believes in air quotes free information, so he shared his gathered info online. I don't think he's the only sole contributor, but I do think this is a really interesting link to pull out. Like
Mm.
Zed believes in freedom of information and is intently researching the Hungry Choir. That's too much of a coincidence for him not to have at least found the Hungry Choir game facts page.
And
Or
contributed to it, like,
yes,
after finding it. Yeah.
exactly. So I think the fact that this has been introduced means we're probably going to see something have happened there. Whether it's just a confirmation of like, and this is how he met Bree or whatever. I think that there
Yeah.
might be a little bit more to it, but we'll see. I just think that's a really cool link to have found.
I think the idea that it's how he found Brie is spot on. Like,
Yeah,
I've sort of headcanoned that already after seeing this prediction,
yeah,
until proven otherwise.
yeah.
I pulled out a prediction from Uncle Thermoscales or Uncle Thermoscales.
Okay.
Um, who so basically, what Uncle Thermoscales noticed is that the banners. So, well, you know how each Kennetier's perspective has a banner at the top. What they noticed is that Avery's is her walking the forest ribbon trail. There's even the
Mm,
wolf there. Which
yes,
this is the moment that I decided to bring this because I went and looked and the wolf is fucking there and I was
you
like, how
hadn't
did I?
noticed that. Yeah,
I noticed it I think early in the story and then sort of forgot.
yeah.
Um. Anyway, yeah. So basically, Uncle Thermoscales has built this theory that the banner kind of gives us hints as to the the way each Kennetier will sort of be defined as a practitioner. So like basically, Uncle Thermoscales touches on like Verona's is focused on her computer in her room. So maybe she's going to be drawn to the sort of Z type technomancy stuff. And then Lucy's is, all these swords stabbed into the ground and lots of like blood red stains. So maybe something to do with blood magic. Um, yeah, but I mostly just brought this because I hadn't noticed that Avery's was the Forest Ribbon Trail. And like, in case there's any other idiots like me out there who hadn't noticed that, like, this needs to be shared.
Mm, yeah. Um, yeah, I think Lucy's is the one that we don't really. have enough connection with, right?
Yeah, I like the
To
blood
fully
connection
place it.
because
Yeah.
she has been affiliated with violence. Like she had the knife as her thing, and so she has done some blood magic accidentally on Paul that one
Yeah,
time,
true.
or
It's true.
accidentally might be a strong word for it. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, yeah, I don't grasp it. Whereas like Verona's definitely. I don't feel like it clinches it. Like Avery's was just immediately like, oh yes, this is her being a finder. Whereas Verona's, it's like it more just summarizes her as a person so far. To my understanding, like it's a very dark image because she likes her dark. There were a bunch of runes everywhere. Like there is the computer there, so I definitely agree with Uncle
Yes.
Thermoscales on that being like important to the picture. But it almost just feels
Yes.
like a wider summary of who she is as a
Yeah.
person slash practitioner.
Yeah. I wonder whether we're gonna get the beats where, in 3 chapters time it's like, oh, and this is what Verona's is. Oh, and that's what Lucy's is. It's this specific moment of the story that we just haven't got to yet.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we'll see. Like, maybe they're distinct moments. Maybe they're more like wider summaries the person themselves. Because there's like, I mean, even their postures comes into it. Like
Yeah.
Lucy has this real intense focus look. Um, Avery's kind of like skipping.
Yeah.
And then like Verona just looks upset.
Mm.
Which I mean, her mural is set in her house, so fair.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. We'll see. We'll see, I guess, whether it's specific things or just kind of vibe.
Yeah.
um Cool. I mean, I guess that's our show, folks.
Yeah. So leave your
Thanks for
answers to the discussion question in the discussion thread, which will be linked
yes,
down below.
yeah, or just thoughts on these chapters or on the episode in general. If you want to support the show, why not leave us a review on your podcatcher of choice, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, whatever else you use.
Yeah, those ads help us get points in the algorithm, and algorithm
Hmm.
points are very important for
Yes, we can
defeating
redeem
the
them
hungry choir.
for buttons, magnets, things like that.
Yep.
With the
We
algorithm
also have
for.
have a Twitter, which we may or may not be
Ooh.
renaming soon, but for right now, it's still at Media FD Podcast.
We haven't really decided. We'll probably rename it.
Yeah,
Or, I don't know,
we're
figure it out.
figuring that out in our own time. We're
Yeah.
very much like the Kennet Others with this.
Yeah.
We're just playing it by ear.
It will take 5 to 6 weeks before we decide to do anything. Um, so if you want to check out the other great content on the Doof Media Network, you can go to doofmedia.com, see all the shows there. There's all kinds of great shows on there. You can check the calendar page for the specific release dates of them.
Yeah, so like about when this episode comes out, about 12 hours ago, there was the Duff Book Club
Yes.
on the first 15 lives of Harry August, which is, I mean, something I'm very excited to go and check out. It's like
Mm,
a Groundhog Day esque type story, which
yeah.
is my favorite type of genre,
Yes,
subgenre.
I
It's
can't remember the author's name, but they've won. She's won a few interesting prizes for science fiction, so
I,
I'm sure it's a great book.
I just realized I should have done Groundhog Day stories for my path because that's like a weird little
Oh yeah,
subgenre of
true.
story.
Yeah, I like that. I like that indeed. If
Anyway,
you want to support the Doof Media Network, you can also become a patron by going to patreon.com/Doof Media and leaving us some dollars.
yes,
It really
we
helps support the
are
network.
at time of recording like 10ish patrons away from
Mm.
getting access to Matt's original story that he's been working on. So basically, he's written some scripts and stuff, and they look really cool. And when we hit that goal, that's when production will actually sort of kick off.
Mm.
Um, and it'll start to happen. So if you want to hear, like Matt is actually a very very good writer. Any of you who have done the right thing alongside him will have seen, and I'm really excited
Mm.
for this. So if that interests you and you're not yet a patron, head on over to patreon.com/Doof Media and help us get that original Matt content.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, cool. While you're on patreon.com, why not head over to patreon.com/Wildbow? That's Wildbow's Patreon. And you can give him some money, and that would be good. And I'm trying to desperately think of a thing from this episode to tie it to, but I can't think of one. So just give him some money. It doesn't always have to be a joke. Just do it. Just support him. Jeez.
Yeah, I mean, you've just listened to like an hour and a half of this
More,
podcast
2 hours.
on the story Wildbow wrote. If you're enjoying it that much and you're in the position to do so, consider giving him some money.
Yep. Do it. All right. And that's the end of
Cut.
our show.